discussion about So today we are hosting this discussion about the pandemic to ask some frequently asked and new concerns related to the current situation of the pandemic within the country. It is the global intent to put an end to this, and all parts of the world are working towards it. But the harsh truth is that the efforts must be simultaneous across the globe to achieve the success. So today in this discussion, we are focusing on the current situation in Sri Lanka and whether we are on that right path towards success. To discuss about this, we have our two panelists. We have Dr. Ravi Rananelia and Dr. Harsha De Silva. Dr. Ravi Rananelia is a fellow and the executive director of the Institute of Health Policy. He is a physician and an economist with degrees in political science and medicine from the University of Cambridge. His doctoral training is in the health economics from Harvard University. With the Institute of Health Policy, Dr. Ravi Rananelia has undertaken research and consulted in more than 30 countries and frequently collaborates with the World Bank, World Health Organization, the Asian Development Bank, and other agencies and governments. Dr. Ravi is considered and recognized as a leading international expert in the areas of health equity, research, and health accounting. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Dr. Ravi, and giving us your time on a Sunday.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. And we also, likewise. And we have Dr. Harsha De Silva, a renowned figure in the country who holds a PhD from the University of Missouri and had his executive training at the MIT. He also received his Eisenhower Fellowship in 2011. Dr. Harsha has been a member of the parliament since 2010 and was former Minister for Economic Reform and Public Distribution and currently represents the main opposition party. In 2016, Dr. Harsha spearheaded the establishment of the well-known Suvasariya, an essential and vital service during the current pandemic, and it now covers the entire island and is free of charge to its users. Welcome and thank you to you too, Dr. Harsha, for making time today for this discussion.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. So to kickstart the discussion, I will briefly explain the structure of the discussion today. The questions will be for our two panelists, and some will come from me and also from the members of Meda Mawatha. And at the end, there will be a Q&A session where the viewers can raise their questions to our panelists. If you have any questions, please feel free to add your questions to the FB Live chat, and we will pick them up at the end of the session later. We will try to limit each question answer to 5 minutes, and I will give an indicator if we exceed 4 minutes. Okay, so shall we start? Okay, so the first question is to Dr. Ravi. So Dr. Ravi, now it has been more than 16 months since we have actively accepted that this is a pandemic. But however, Sri Lanka is at a worse position than where we were a year ago. And each wave has been worse than the last. 16 months down the line, you would think that we are more prepared and foresee the situations to face it and that we're taking the correct measures. But we see more cases on a daily basis and a rising death toll. In your opinion, where are we going wrong or what are we doing wrong?
Sure. I mean, I would certainly agree that we are definitely in a worse position today than a year ago. And that's actually for two different reasons. One is, it's important to emphasize the global pandemic is worse today than it's ever been. I mean, more people are getting infected each day globally. I know people think, oh, you know, America's getting vaccinated, but the reality is the situation globally is actually worse than at any point. And the virus is far more infectious today than it was a year ago. It's 2 to 3 times more infectious than the virus that came out of China in January or December, even 2019. So that's the first thing. Locally, I think the situation is worse because I think we have lost the political social will to fight this effectively, to bring it under control. So I think that's the second reason. Why are we in this position? I mean, basically, I would say, you know, I would give credit to the president, the government for their initial response. We did a great job in getting into local transmission about a year ago, in about May of 2020. But where the first mistake that was made, and all of this really relates to testing, the health authorities simply got it wrong. They did not understand the importance of testing, and we let down our guard. We should have increased testing during the April, May, June months. And as we now know, we probably had a quarantine leak in June, which went undetected for several months and emerged to us as the Brandeis cluster. And we didn't learn from that. So I think the health authorities failed to learn from their mistakes. They still think in the same way, even now, about testing. As you know, in the current outbreak, they've actually reduced testing and not increased it, which is a serious error. And I think politically what's happened is, I mean, the government did well. I mean, I would say the military, the intelligence services did a great job in giving us very good quarantine system and in doing very good contact tracing last year. But that now is essentially nullified. We started open the borders. Contact tracing, I think, is not working very well now because we're overwhelmed. And I think more than that, there has been a failure at the political level to ask why we failed and to try and ask
I think we lost Dr. Ravi for a little. Let's just give a few seconds. Okay, so I think we just lost Dr. Ravi for a little while. I will direct the question that I had for Dr. Harsha. So Dr. Harsha, it goes without saying that this coronavirus had an immense impact on the country's already not so great economic situation and has impacted the lives of many. With the cost of living rising and income decreasing, it's creating a deficit everywhere, and it is placing a strain on Sri Lanka's chances of coming out of this pandemic. So in your opinion, what sort of economic plan do you envision for us to get out of this pandemic, given the present financial difficulties?
Thank you for that question. Looks like Dr. Ravi is back. Can you see if he's connected so that he can continue with this answer?
Okay, yeah, he's back.
So,
Dr. Ravi, sorry, we lost you for a little there.
yes, sorry about that, yes.
Yes, I think we lost you at the part of where we are reducing the testing, and then
Sure. So, I mean, we need to, the best, most effective control intervention to control the virus is testing. And as you noticed in the current wave, which has been going on for the past few months, we've actually reduced testing. That's a huge error. And we are now faced with the Delta variant, which is much harder to control. It's much more infectious. So I think we will lose control of this. I expect there will be thousands of deaths in the next few months. And the reality is we already have hundreds of deaths every week now. So I think that's where we're going. I see a failure of political will. Clearly at the political level, there is no longer a strategy. I mean, the president has a very clear strategy, but the government is not following the president's own strategy on COVID, which was to essentially eliminate the virus and prevent outbreaks. That's clearly not happening. And it seems to me the authorities almost have given up on that goal and that vision.
Yes. So considering the current situation and the Delta variant, what is your opinion about the vaccinations and the current process in the country for that?
I mean, I think everyone knows it's been a bit haphazard at times, and there's, I mean, I have to say that there was a technical plan for vaccination done by the technical people. I mean, I think it's often been ignored, and there's been a lot of politicization. I mean, I guess the Sri Lankans were not surprised by that. That's how things happen. So I think, there are those problems. I think clearly we face a huge challenge, which essentially most countries face. It's going to be very, very hard to vaccinate our population before 2022 because there's a huge global shortage, and getting decent vaccines is also hard. I mean, I'm not sure it's a mistake. I mean, it was a judgment that was made. I think the only way we would have been in a better place today would have been to do some things government and the opposition, I think, did not want to do, which would have meant essentially ordering vaccines at the end of 2020, January of 2021, ordering vaccines without regulatory approval. We should have ordered vaccines. I mean, that's what the rich capitalist countries did. I mean, America, Canada, Australia, UK, Europe, they all ordered vaccines. Some of those vaccines didn't even exist, but they placed orders and paid cash up front, and they took the risk. So if you ordered then, you were in front of the queue and you could get the vaccines like Israel or the US today. If you delayed a bit, like Australia, for example, they're sort of back in the queue. So they're not going to be able to vaccinate for everyone until the end of this year. But for us, when we waited for approvals, then we essentially ordered when the rest of the world ordered. And so, you know, it's going to be a big struggle.
Yes.
And I think also I would say our current vaccination, our current vaccination goal is probably not sufficient. With these new variants and the reality that the world is not controlling the virus, we should be ordering enough vaccines for everyone in the country, including the children. So we should be ordering, you know, 40 million doses, not 18 million or whatever it is.
Yes, that's right. So talking about the Delta variant now and the vaccines, so it was recently discovered that the unvaccinated people may serve as incubators to the new variants that could evolve in dangerous ways, and what we call now is the Delta Plus. Now, Sri Lanka, I think currently we have only inoculated about 10 to 20% of the population. So what can we do to, I mean, we know that vaccinations are coming, but until such time, what do you think we should be taking as precautionary measures?
Okay, so I'm not sure it's been recently revealed. I think the virologists, the epidemiologists have always known that the virus could mutate. It has been mutating from the day this virus was born back in 2019, right? So it's always mutating. And it can develop more dangerous variants, even not only in unvaccinated people, but also in vaccinated people. And in fact, the key driver of these more dangerous variants is actually probably people who've been previously infected. So actually vaccines might increase the risk because it's when the virus is facing pressure from the immune system that the mutations tend to favor mutations that allow the virus to escape the immune response. So in fact, having populations who are partially immune, could be through natural infection or vaccination, and having high levels of transmission are in fact the perfect breeding grounds to incubate new variants. And that's what we've seen. Where did the new variants come from? From countries which failed to control the virus and high levels of transmission. So the UK, South Africa, Brazil, and of course, India. These are exactly the countries that would have incubated these new variants. On our side, I would say it's statistically unlikely that we will be one of the countries that mutate, one of these globally dangerous variants, simply because we only have a small fraction of cases, right? We only want less than 1% of the world's population. But it can happen anywhere. The risk is always there. But the basic thing is that if you want to stop variants emerging, really the only thing we can say is you have to stop transmission. So if you look at countries like China, yes, the virus emerged in China, but China has not developed any new variants. There have been no new variants reported from, say, Taiwan, from Australia, from Vietnam, from New Zealand. The countries which controlled it do not develop. So if you don't want new variants, my only simple message, we have to stop the virus.
Right. And so what do you think about, now we had a lockdown, we had a partial lockdown. Do you think those would have any effect, or what should we do for the maximum effect?
So, about lockdowns, globally, the evidence, the epidemiological evidence is very clear that the most effective control intervention we have is testing. PCR testing, tracing, and isolating people to prevent them from infecting other people. The testing is only because you need to find those people who have the virus, right? And so if you don't do that, you cannot control this. You cannot control this virus, and this is especially true with Delta, simply by wearing masks, simply by doing social distancing, simply by doing lockdowns. Will not work. Lockdowns will only work if coupled with stepped up testing. And what we did recently was a lockdown, which was oversold, I think, to the politicians. And I think some of my medical colleagues oversold it. You cannot stop this an outbreak in 14 days to lockdown if you reduce testing. So what we did was we reduced testing, and then we had a lockdown, but it was flawed. We had half the country or half the workforce is still going to work and on the roads. Everyone knows this. And it wasn't a very intelligent lockdown, right? I mean, you've explained, I'm in Sydney right now. Sydney has a lockdown, but it's a very different lockdown. People can go outside this house, right? I mean, I went out this morning for 3-4 hours to the beach, and we took a long walk through the town. nobody's wearing masks. They're supposedly in lockdown, right? So this is how their lockdown works. People are encouraged to go out, but what the restrictions are, they don't want people going to work. So they want people to try and work from home. They don't want people congregating in groups. So there's a strict ban on people, groups of more than 10 people. And they encourage people to go out because the public health messaging is very clear. The highest risk of transmission is indoors. So we actually want you to go out, but just don't mix with other people. So it's a very different kind of lockdown to the one that we had in Sri Lanka, where we forced people indoors. And the other thing that the people in Australia are now reporting, because they have very good contact tracing data on this, is that the Delta variant is so infectious that essentially, if you get the virus, everyone in your household will get it. And so they are reporting now in their contact tracing, which I think a very important thing to know, that with the Delta variant, they are finding 100% of everyone else in the family will be infected. So this is the critical thing to know. This is a much more dangerous variant than we've had before. It's much more transmissible.
So we really need to change our perspective on how we are going to be locking down and trying to contain it.
I think if you want to contain it, we have to get one thing right, and that is we have to understand health authorities and the public health people who make the decisions in Sri Lanka as a whole. I'm not talking about individuals who do get it, but as a whole, they do not accept the importance of testing.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we should have spent the past 18 months, like many other countries, increasing testing capacity to 10 times what we have now.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ravi.
Sure.
So, Dr. Harisha, I think I will repeat the question to you again. So what I was saying was that the coronavirus had made a huge impact on the Sri Lanka's not so great economic situation that was prevailing. And with the cost of living rising and the income decreasing, it's creating a deficit everywhere. And it is placing a strain on Sri Lanka's chances of coming out of this pandemic. So what sort of economic plan do you envision for us to get out of this pandemic, given the financial difficulties we are going through now?
Thanks a lot. I mean, it was an external exposition by Dr. Ravi, and I think you did really well in asking the right questions, so that we've come to a point where he has basically said, look, we need to test. And I have been following him from perhaps March or April of 2020, where he's been saying the same thing about test, increase the number of tests. But for whatever reason, that has not been priority. And he's shown us that, where they have been successful is to test and, I guess, contact trace whenever that was relevant, and isolate. Here, what we're doing is, as we all know, locking down. Now, for instance, in my area of Kotte, yesterday, the largest GN division got locked down. And that's a place called Ubesekarapura. And we have about 12,500 folks living in a small area. What has happened is they congregate. They have nothing else to do. Their homes are small and they are just, everywhere. And what I heard, which has not been confirmed, but there seems to be truth to what has been told to us, is they tested 40 plus people and 35 plus are tested positive, right? And I tried to find out how many people there had been vaccinated, and the number is very disappointing. 900 people, 920 people out of a total population of 12,500, right? Now, what's going to happen here? Will the 1 week lockdown, resolve the problem? From what Dr. Ravi said, if it is a Delta variant, he said everyone is going to get it, right? So then once you open up, you're going to go back to your workplace. And most of these people are daily workers, self-employed, working in other people's homes and stuff like that. So it's going to spread. So it is a dangerous situation that we are in. So what I am sort of understanding from what Dr. Ravi has said is that we need to stop the transmission. That's what he said. We have to stop the transmission. So if locking down is not the solution, then obviously we are not going to stop the transmission by, sort of following this strategy. So I don't profess to know exactly what the solution is, but as he has said, you need to find out who's got it and stop them from spreading it. Now, we talked about the vaccines. I just was in Parliament when the Honorable Minister responded to a question posed by the Leader of the Opposition. And this is what she said. She said they have ordered 10 million doses of AstraZeneca, Covishield, at $5.25 a shot. Then Pfizer, they ordered 5 million at $6.75 a shot. They ordered 13 million Sputnik at $9.95 a single injection. And Sinopharm, 14 million doses at $15 a vaccine. So that means 42 million doses have been ordered. I guess that is for 21 million people, which is the exact population of this country, at a cost of $425 million. Now, we hear, even today, the Sunday Times had reported that the NMRA had wanted clinical trials, data from the third clinical trials or what have you, for the Sinovac jab. And they haven't provided it yet, but they had said that they have to order 13 million doses minimum, and the price shall not be revealed. And if they reveal the price, the contract will be in trouble. Now, the issue is, interesting point Dr. Ravi raised is that he said some of the developed countries went ahead and ordered the vaccine, and that is true. But I don't think it's only developed countries. I think even Bangladesh, if I'm not mistaken, did make some initial pre-orders and perhaps even paid for it. So there are countries who've been able to sort of look at how to deal with the economic issue down the road, because there is a balance. Now, I must say this. Lawyers have argued, and I've been reading in the public domain, that the cabinet approved the AstraZeneca vaccine on the 22nd of January, and that the NMRA approved it on the 22nd of January, and there were procedures in place for emergency procurement. On the 22nd itself, they could have ordered, but they delayed it. And the cabinet took 1 more month to give its approval to order the vaccine. So here we have a situation where we haven't pre-ordered. We know it is essential that we vaccinate as many people as we possibly can. And then yet we defer the ordering of the vaccine till the 22nd of February. So that 1 month delay has caused a severe impact on the economy. And the point that Dr. Ravi said is what the president wanted to do seemed to not have happened, because whoever the decision makers haven't really understood perhaps the issue. And then here now we have a situation where the whole country is suffering. We have, I mean, the dollar in the black market is trading at 225, 230 rupees, and import restrictions have been brought in. There is no. Today's paper says TVs, telephones, so-called luxury items will be stopped. The country is in a real mess. And that is not necessarily because of the pandemic. What the pandemic has done is to exacerbate the problem that has been there for a long period of time, right? Two things. One is we need to really figure out how to stop the spread. And what Dr. Ravi said scared me. He said thousands of deaths can be expected in the months to come, right? And he said, there is no political will, and no longer do we have a strategy. I mean, that is not how a country should be going forward. If we know that it's not just the health issue, the economics issue, right? So one priority, find a way, listen to the advice and stop the spread. Two, that we need to then start thinking about the bigger issue of coming out of the economic hole we are in. And I don't want to take time here to explain all that. I can't hear you. I cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. What I was saying was, in terms of the economy, the people currently are struggling between two types of survival, either surviving from the coronavirus or surviving without going hungry. So it's a very tricky situation we are in the country. But thank you for that answer, Dr. Harsha. I think I will have another question for Dr. Ravi. So Dr. Ravi, now, do you think the current healthcare system that we have in Sri Lanka is sufficiently equipped and organized to provide health equity and fight against this pandemic? And moreover, how can we prepare ourselves for a next wave if there's ever going to be one, or maybe another pandemic that might rise?
Sure. I think there were two questions you asked, actually.
Yes. Saving time.
So you asked about health equity, but you also asked about pandemic response. So maybe let me answer the pandemic response first thing, and then do the other one.
Sure.
In terms of pandemic response, I mean, our health system is perfectly capable in terms of its resources of handling this pandemic, right? I mean, I would just point to some things which are really excellent in our system. We have excellent contact tracing. We've done excellent contact tracing, much better than the rest of the world. And it comes from a long experience in dealing with things like malaria and other infectious diseases. The problem now is that our contact tracing is completely overwhelmed. And I really worry about our public health inspectors out in the field. They are completely overwhelmed, and this is on top of that. So, but we do have some really strong things in our system. We can control this pandemic. The problem has always been from day one, we've not had the correct strategy. And that's been a huge technical failure. And I would say probably the biggest public health failure in Sri Lankan public health history in the past half century, the failure to understand the importance of testing. And we could have done the testing. We have the resources, we have the money, etc. So that's on the pandemic response. And I would also say, if you look around the world, there's really very little correlation between the strength of a health system and its ability to deal with this virus, right? You have countries like Cambodia, which frankly has a shambolic health system, who has done excellently against this virus. And then you have countries like the UK and Sweden, which supposedly have excellent health systems, and they've done terribly, and millions have died. So it's not related to your health system. It really boils down to strategy. And so that's the first thing. Now, in terms of health equity, what I would say is that in terms of overall health equity, and this is something that I'd studied for 20, 30 years, pretty much all my professional life, we do a great job. The health system is actually doing a great job at maximizing health equity, given our level of economic resources and given the level of spending on our health system, which is not very much. We only spend about 3% of our national income on health. And for that level of spending, we do better than essentially any other country. So we do well, and I think the system is fundamentally sound, but in the case of the pandemic, we just chose the wrong strategy.
Yes. So do you think we, from what you see in what's going on, do you think we are learning from our past mistakes to apply them into the future? Because truth be told, it doesn't look like it. We are going through a third wave right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the strengths of our, and I kind of reflect on this, something I work in this field for so many years, is that, one thing I always felt was our health system is very good at learning from its mistakes, right? So that's one of the reasons it performs so well. It gradually learns, it figures out, it tries something, doesn't quite work, and then it works that out and then comes up with an alternate or revised strategy. And that works fine. But the problem is that learning, which we're really good at doing, takes place over years and decades. And faced with this particular pandemic where we had to learn from mistakes in literally weeks or months, completely failed. It just hasn't been fast enough. And I think the reason for that is that at the technical level, many of our best people are no longer in position. I mean, I think it's fairly well known in the public health community. We had some excellent epidemiologists, for example, in the public sector, but many of the best ones are no longer in the country. They're so good, they join international agencies, they left the country, they work for WHO. I know some of them are not very happy about what goes on today in the country, but we have lost our top ones. And I have to say, you know, Dr. Harsh is there, a member of parliament. I mean, the reason we lose our top people is because long-standing politicization in the public sector, which I think encourages many of the better people to leave.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Dr. Ravi. So Dr. Harsh, another question for you. I think this goes we can't miss this question. So as the founder of Suicidaria, could you tell us a little bit more about the role that it's playing in the current pandemic, and how can we improve it to be able to handle this increasing demand?
Well, I mean, I'll just give a very quick answer to that question because I want to respond and add to what Dr. Ravi said. Suicidaria is doing an amazing job. And they work 24/7. It's an absolutely dedicated staff led by Mr. Duminder Ratnayak and Mr. Sohan De Silva. You know, I applaud the work done by every one of our 1,500 members of the team 24 hours a day. They carry about 500, I think, COVID patients every day. They run 297 units, and they are among the best. The WHO recently told me that they believe that this is perhaps the best such service in the entire developing world. So I told them, you better get some data so we can be proud of something that this country has done right. But I want to move to what Dr. Ravi said. You know, two things about health policy, and I know he's the expert on it. I just looked at the numbers last night, and we spent 367 billion rupees on healthcare. That includes the center and the provincial councils. Now, that was for 19,600 doctors, 37,800 nurses, and 8,300 attendants in 609 state-owned hospitals with 77,100 beds. Now, interestingly, there are only 717 ICU beds in the entire country. And if you look at it another way, you know, that's a doctor for 1,170 people. Now, while that is the case, we also have 217 private sector hospitals with 5,170 beds. Now, if you look at from the expenditure side, I don't have the latest data, but what I have read mostly is that 50% of all expenditure is actually out of pocket. So people have a self-selection process. So you, while having the opportunity to go to a state hospital, choose otherwise and go to a private hospital. And the question there is one of equity is that you see, if you go to a private hospital, if you have the money, you get a better service. I don't know, right? Do you or do you not? But at least you get a quicker service. You don't have to probably stay in line for 2 years to be operated on and so on. So from an equitable point of view, you know, is it equitable for the people of this country, material of whether you're rich or poor? Now, that question needs to then be answered in another way. And if you look at the entire welfare structure of this country, you know, it doesn't matter whether you have money or you don't have money, you're forced things free, right? And it is the same in education, it's the same in healthcare. So the question needs to be asked, who needs to be given the subsidy and what type of subsidies should each person receive? So then the fundamental question that we need to address, beyond the petty politics and what is said on the platform for cheap political gain and to win elections, is if we are to really support through welfare programs the people who need the support, then the subsidy must be given to the receiver, not to the supplier, right? So you somehow find out who receives, who needs the subsidy, whether it is healthcare, whether it is education, whether it is fuel subsidy, or whether it is any sort of subsidy. Because just this morning, believe me, in the Sunday Times front page, I was reading, unknown to parents, Suraksha children's insurance scheme had been revised. So apparently this program said, if a parent dies of a kid or kid dies, a parent gets, some 1.5 million rupees or something like that. Now that has been brought down to parents if they earn less than 15,000 rupees a month. Then on care, there was unlimited pay, claim. You could make an unlimited claim on certain types of surgery on children. And now that has been reduced to 250,000 rupees and so on. So what's the point in just blanket subsidy and welfare program? So that's the long answer, but it's not really an answer, but it's just a point that I'm raising, because if this group is going to talk about issues without pandering to various political interests, then these are the issues that must be discussed in this country, right? And doctors need to be paid better, teachers need to be paid better. Obviously our professionals are leaving this country, right? So in order to do that, you have to have money, but there is no money. Ravi said that perhaps 3% of national income was spent on healthcare. It was actually 2.4% this 2020. And that is also because there was almost a 35% increase in health costs due to the pandemic. But if you look at the income, the government's income, revenue, it was about 27% of revenue, right? So that means paying salaries, or capital, medicine, everything. But compare that to the interest cost of the government of Sri Lanka, which was for last year, 72% of total government revenue. So there you see the problem.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Harsha. I think we have so many questions that needs answering and needs fixing as well, right? So to proceed, I would like to remind our viewers that if you all have any questions, please post them on the FB Live chat. So now we are going to be going to our questions from our Meda Mawatha members. So we have Dr. R.C. Ratnasinghe, who is a medical officer at the pediatric ward at ITH, and Dr. Brian Siaguna, who is working in MENA. So over to you, Dr. R.C. and Dr. Brian.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes.
Yes. First of all, thanks for the introduction to Mithri, and thank you for inviting me for this discussion. My first question is towards Dr. Ravi. I want to know, it was noted that many people were reluctant to get vaccinated, especially the first dose, due to the fear of side effects. Do you think the government did a good job educating the masses about the safety and benefits of the vaccine?
Shall I answer?
Yes, please,
Yeah.
Dr. Ravi. Dr.
Okay.
Ravi, I see
Okay.
that you have raised your question, raised your hand as well. I think we might have another point to talk about.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly on what Dr. Harsh said previously, but let me answer this question that this has been asked. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think the government could do better on the messaging, but I have to say, in the short run, I'm not too worried about this problem, because, and this is the technical term for this, is vaccine hesitancy, which is people don't want to take the vaccine. I think in a situation where we only have enough doses for 10% of the population, I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, our biggest problem right now is we don't have enough doses to put into people. So, if some people don't want I would move on. And in fact, the global evidence is very clear now that as people get vaccinated and as they see their friends getting the benefits and people around them getting the benefit, the vaccine hesitancy falls. So there's less resistance, and we can see this in country after country after more people get vaccinated. But at the moment, we had such a shortage, I would just move on. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about this. Not really the biggest challenge we face on that. If I could just address something about what Dr. Harsha said, if I can take the liberty. So just on this issue, I mean, the question he raises is that, he is very correct to observe, and we all know this, that we have a mixed health system. We have a free, publicly funded, tax-funded health system, which is free for everyone. And even for people like Dr. Harsha, for people like me, I would say I'm probably well off, and I probably don't use the public sector, but it's free if I want to use it. And that for those of us who can afford to, we can go into sorry, can you hear me? I seem to have lost the video at this point. Hello?
Dr. Ravi, we can hear you.
Yeah, you can. Okay, so I think I lost your video. It went black. So that's true, and the private sector is there for people who want to pay privately, and that's fine. I have to say that this is, for the level of public spending and for the level of taxes that we're willing to collect, this is still the most optimal, equitable, efficient system, right? There are very few systems like this around the world, and I would mention a couple. One is Hong Kong. Hong Kong is also a world beater on healthcare. It has a very similar system, a free public sector and private sector for those who want to pay. The problem about changing this system is you cannot do better unless we increase taxes and increase public spending. There is really no way to target the subsidies explicitly on the poorer people. Countries try and do this, but nobody is able to target their subsidies as well as Hong Kong or Sri Lanka or countries like us. So that's the reality. Given the fact the government doesn't have money to pay for everyone, we're better off letting the better off voluntarily choose the private sector. And we shouldn't force them, because if we force them, then the question we have to address, and it's a political question, will the better off people who pay the taxes be willing to pay taxes for a service which they're not allowed to use in theory? I mean, right now they don't use it, but in theory they can use it. And are they willing to support taxes for the poor people? And we know, for example, give the American example, Medicaid, the US example of this, is a targeted welfare program to provide free healthcare to poor Americans. It's consistently underfunded because of middle-class Americans, rich Americans do not want to pay taxes to look after the poor. So we're better off having the system. There is still no system with our current level of government spending which achieves better equity, better targeting of subsidies and better outcomes than the system we have. And we have countries like, Hong Kong. It's not a country, of course. And I should say, if we want to do better, Australia is one of these examples like us. They don't actually have free government-funded primary care. Most people in Australia, which is very unusual for a rich country, go to private GPs, but they have a partial subsidy. So there is a partial subsidy for people to use private doctors and private hospitals. But the thing is, to do the Australian kind of system, you have to raise taxes. So what I would always appeal to the politicians is in both political parties, on both sides of the chamber, is we have to address our tax market. If you really care about health, raise taxes, and raise taxes on the better off people like me. We need to be paying more taxes, more income tax, more progressive income tax, etc. That is the way to get a better health system. There is, and I spent 30 years looking at this, there is really no way to get a better health system with this current level of spending. We have to accept there are some problems. We cannot solve them without more public money.
Yes.
May I?
Sure.
Yes, for about 1 minute, Dr. Harsha.
Yeah. No. So this is an optimization question that we have. It's not one of maximization. So we have to work with what we got. And I do agree with Dr. Ravi. We have a damn good system as at, what we can get for the money that we put in, right? So that is given. But on taxes, we are perhaps the lowest, right? And I mean it, in the whole world, emerging world, in terms of taxes to GDP. We cannot run a country with 8.5%, 9% in taxes. And also the taxes are very regressive. Now, even the rich folks got a tax relief in 2019 December, and the numbers for the first time indicate what has happened. Last week, the Ministry of Finance released its a 4 months assessment of taxes. Guess what happened? We saw on the one hand, Financial Times and others boasting about how much profit the listed companies made, massive profits in the billions, tens of billions. But corporate income tax came down as a percentage by 27%, whereas taxes on the poor went up by 30%. That is VAT and other consumption taxes, which are certainly regressive. So, Dr. Ravi, how can we get our people who are well-to-do, upper middle class, agree and accept the reality of this world? They have to contribute.
Yeah. Can I just
Yes, go on.
Can I just comment on that? Well,
Yes.
I mean, it's not up to me, right? So, I mean, let me just say, it's actually factually correct. We have one of the lowest tax bases now in the world, not just the developing world. We're heading towards Somalian type taxes, not say even capitalist countries like the United States have much higher rates of tax than we do. So I think we're going away from capitalism towards a Somalia type outcome. So this is no good for anyone. It's no good for a market economy. But it's not for me to raise taxes. You know who's got to raise the taxes? It's people, Dr. Harsha, people like you, people in Parliament have to make the case, and they have to get into Parliament, and whoever wins the election, they have to have a platform and an agenda to systematically raise taxes on the better off and to make the case to the voters. Now, I would say most voters in this country, especially the poorer ones, if you went to them and said, look, we're going to raise taxes on the better off, but we're going to use the taxes to improve the schools, to improve the healthcare, to pay for roads. And you know what? We don't have to go to China to borrow money for infrastructure. We can pay it with our own money. I mean, the reason we have to go to China to borrow for infrastructure is because we don't have the tax money. If we're willing to do those things, I think there is a political basis for politicians to persuade the public. Public are not stupid, right? The public, I think, would buy into that. And I think that is the basis. I strongly believe in market-led economic growth, but if we want strong market-led economic growth, we need to learn from capitalist democracies. We have to tax the rich. Adequate.
I agree. So let's keep it at that for the moment.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Dr. Asif here. Thanks for having me to the this discussion. So, Dr. Harsha, I have this question for you. So, do you believe the current strategy of tackling the pandemic through this presidential task force is the most efficient method? And would there be a better outcome if it is to be handled by some kind of epidemiologist, virologist, or microbiologist leading the task force? Or do we need a proper channel to handling this pandemic in this country?
The answer is quite obvious. I don't think the way it is being done is correct, because very quickly, I mean, it's just not a health issue. I don't think just virologists and epidemiologists can deal with this. It's a multi-pronged solution that we require, health, economics, social, security, right? So we have specialists in these areas, and they should feed into a structure where one person has to lead this, right? And that either one person or a subcommittee of people at the highest level. This is a national issue, needs to be addressed by national leaders. And we have something called the Disaster Management Act, which was brought in by Madam Chandrika after the tsunami. And that very specifically says, in a calamity that we never anticipated this pandemic, neither did we anticipate tsunami. But then after that, it was set up and put in place, where a committee comprising the president, the prime minister, and the leader of the opposition, and a select number of ministers and a select number of opposition MPs should formulate this body. And under that, you can have the various experts, and the data evidence can be presented. and this body would make the decisions. You know, people like myself have been asking for this for a many number of months. And guess what? Guess what? Last week, the government had decided to appoint this committee last week. Now it is apparently going to be appointed maybe next week or so. But now the horse has bolted. Now they got to deal with what's on ground. Something that I agree with the former Prime Minister when he said that the commander of the Sri Lanka army, being the head of this COVID, the task force, the appropriateness of that needs to be questioned because he's head of a department. And then on the other hand, equally, which he didn't mention, which I will mention now, is the head of the presidential task force on the economics to deal with COVID, is also headed by Mr. Basil Rajapaksa, who is no one in the government. True, happens to be a brother of the president, but who is he? He's just a family member. You can't have family members running the presidential task force in a democratic structure like this when the laws exist on how to establish these committees with a chain of command and responsibilities. Mr. Rajapaksa, as a private citizen, can leave to wherever he lives, wherever in the world it may be. There is no accountability. There is no answering of the decisions in Parliament. And no one can question these people. So that is not how I think this should be done. So I'm at least happy, even at this late stage, they have thought about this and they're going to put this committee together. And to go back to what Dr. Ravi said, if this is going to continue to spread and we have no real strategy and we are kind of lost in, as we very clearly see right now, then perhaps the group put together may be able to put it right once again. So let's hope for the best.
Thank you, Dr. Harsha, for the answer.
Yes, Dr. Ravi, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think we can have, we can debate the structures. And I think there is an important point that Dr. Harsha mentioned, that in a democratic system, it's important that the people in charge at the lower level, let's say the intermediate level below the president, be accountable. So I think and I think also there's an important role for politicians to play here, because at the end of the day, there are trade-offs. There's business concerns, economic concerns, livelihood concerns, welfare, and there's health and whatever, and border issues, etc. And these are huge trade-offs that have to be made. And we should have politicians in charge. I think politicians, that is the role of politicians. But I think we should not allow that, I think, for us to get distracted from another problem here, which is, at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision, right? Somebody has to make a decision on the trade-offs, right? And what I observe, actually, people think, oh gosh, we don't like some people don't like the military people being there in charge, and I'm not going to get into that debate, but they assume that this means strong leadership. What I observe is not strong leadership, right? Because if you look at, for example, the issue of our borders, we had different ministers and health people saying different things. There should have been a clear decision. And the fact that we see that there were no clear decisions, to me, indicates not strong leadership or militarized leadership. It actually indicates almost a deficit of leadership. And I think that's what we should be quite honest about. And I don't want to get into to criticize the military, because that's a controversial issue and people have different views about that. But what I do see is, I think, a failure or an absence of leadership, because ultimate decisions have to be made. And you cannot just simply pass this to a committee. Somebody has to make the decision. And whether it's a parliamentary democracy with a prime minister, at the end of the day, the prime minister has to make the decision, right? If you take New Zealand, lots of debate. At the end of the day, Jacinda Ardern, she's a prime minister, she has to make it. So we have to ask, where does the buck stop?
I completely agree. So that's my point. I mean, there are specialists in various areas at the second levels, but given the evidence, somebody has to make the call, and you can't have two people making the same call in opposite directions. And we have seen so many instances where these decisions have been reversed every other day. So that's what I have to say.
And this is also, I think, a little bit of the source of the issue. Without the proper direction and the leadership, people are confused about what to be doing, what should they not be doing. And so I think that's probably also one of the reasons we are not being able to contain this, because without giving the strict instructions about what to do and not to do, like in April, we might see another mix of the pandemic coming out, because people were completely relaxed about doing their shopping for Urdu and all of that, right? So I think until we see a proper end to this, we need to see that leadership, and we need to be given strict instructions, because I think even though we are grown up, sometimes I think we are all at the heart, we want to be going back to our normal lives before this pandemic. So we are striving towards it. So I think it's the government and the authorities to give us that instruction to tell what to do and what not to do. And if you don't, this is what's going to happen, right? So I think we are really running out of time, but we have one question that we would like to ask from a viewer. So I think this is for you, Dr. Rana Nelia. So the question is, since we are going towards economic crisis, I believe at least we have to open our borders for the tourists who received both doses of vaccines from Pfizer, AstraZeneca, or Moderna. This step is already initiated by Maldives, and now they're attracting a high number of tourists to them. So what can we do to initiate the tourism in Sri Lanka in a safe manner to overcome this crisis?
I would say that perspective, I'm afraid I would strongly disagree with it. I mean, Sri Lanka is not a set of small islands with a beach, right? I mean, we have 20 million people. Most of them do not work in tourism. Our biggest foreign exchange earner is not tourism, right? I mean, it's actually sending our people abroad to the Gulf to work, right? That's our biggest foreign exchange earner, let's not forget. And then our second biggest foreign exchange earner is exporting stuff. And look if you don't control the borders, we cannot control the virus. And what happens when we let virus and variants into the country? Well, if we have Delta variant, guess what? All those Gulf countries are not going to allow Sri Lankans to land. That's what they've done, right? Bahrain, Kuwait, etc. Do you think that does any good for our foreign exchange earnings in terms of our people that we unfortunately have to send abroad to earn foreign currency for us? And what does it do for exports? If we really want to, I want Sri Lanka to be a rich country in my lifetime, right? The only way that an Asian country can become a rich country in a generation is through expanding exports, right? If you're a tiny country like Maldives, or I don't know, Turks and Caicos, or I don't know, some Bahamas, maybe you can do it through tourism. But for a country of 21 million people, the only way is through manufacturing and through exports, and that is the sector we need to protect. And having rampant virus in the country is not a way of protecting our factories. And we know all these factories that have outbreaks and they have to shut down. We've seen the effect on the ports, major foreign exchange earner. Tourism is not the way for us to build jobs and to build our economy. So I tend to disagree, because I'm also an economist, and what I know about economics is the only way for us to become a rich nation is through developing our export industry at the current stage, and we need to look after them first. And that's what Vietnam has done. Vietnam has no tourists, but their exports are booming. Korea has no tourists. Export sector and economy are booming, right? So I think that's what, and China, no tourists. They're one of the biggest tourist markets in the world. They have no tourists, they don't send their people out, but their economy, their manufacturing sector is booming, and they're riding out this pandemic. So we need to learn from the successes, and we should not get distracted by, I think, examples which don't really apply to us.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Ravi. That is a very good perspective to look at it. Yes, Dr. Harsha.
Going back to the first question you asked and tying up with what Dr. Ravi said, I agree with him by and large. That is why I have been very critical of this import substitution industrialization model. Which is taking us back to the 1970s and saying, let's produce our goods ourselves and, have large tariff walls around this country. Para tariffs are so high that we cannot participate in what Professor Premachandra Tukorala, for instance, at ANU has been writing for a long period of time on integrating with global production networks. And I like to use this example, and that is of this telephone. This telephone is made in 43 countries. 43 countries, and Sri Lanka is not part of the 43 countries. Vietnam is, South Korea is, Thailand is, India is. So then you got to start thinking, where is the growth going to come from? Yes, I'm not going to completely say tourism is off. Tourism is something that we can utilize to add to our growth story. But certainly tourism is not going to be our lead growth story. We are not the Maldives. We have 20 million people who are capable of doing way more than what we are doing, right? And therefore, the incentive structures must be created for growth to take place by becoming a part of the global production enterprise. Right? Come on. I mean, let me give you an example. In the 80s, in 2000, Vietnam and Sri Lanka had pretty much the similar market share in the global exports, right? Similar market share, something like 0.3%. Sri Lanka has come down to 0.15%, and Vietnam has gone to 5%. Now, what is the difference in the politics and policy between, 2000, early 2000s and now? If you look at Sri Lanka, it has become a closed economy. We are back to where we were even pre-1977 with taxes and import controls and sort of discouraging people to invest in what are called tradable products. And incentivizing them to go into construction and various services that are protected and are inefficient yet, and in some industries that are inefficient yet protected, therefore providing massive profit opportunities for them. So the economic model that I see after the pandemic, and this pandemic needs to be somehow controlled, held back. And Dr. Ravi's point about you see the cost and benefit of opening has to be clearly understood. And just because we bring some a bunch of tourists from some country and say they are in the bio bubble is not these may be anecdotes, but they don't belong to the basic story of our intended prospects of growth. So that's what I'm talking about, that Sri Lanka shouldn't build a wall around this island. Instead, we have to build bridges from this country to the rest of the world. And that is where we got to take this country forward. So as a politician, I have to always say something positive and what we plan to do. So that's my spirit.
Yes, I think consider this new norm, the work from home and how our lives have changed. I think we all should be taking a new perspective on to see how we are going to be growing the economy without trying to go back to the norms, like the tourism. Sorry. Yes, Dr. Ravi.
Let me just, there's probably no disagreement here. Between the parties. The president and the governing party have said, they are for the production economy of Sri Lanka, right? I'm all for that. So if we're for the production economy of Sri Lanka, we should protect it. And we don't protect it by favoring a sector which doesn't really produce stuff. I know it produces foreign exchange and employs people, and it can be part of the growth story, but it is not the fundamental part of our production economy. So this is where I see the contradiction in the government strategy. It says production economy, but then it's pursuing a pandemic control strategy, which is undermining the production economy. So I agree with the goals. Like I like the president's, as I said at the beginning, COVID strategy is great. The problem is we need to implement it, right? We need a strategy which actually helps us achieve the goals in the strategy.
Yes, so I think our time is really up now, so we might have to wrap it up. Thank you, Dr. Harsh and Dr. Ravi, for giving new perspectives for this discussion, and I think we might continue on one of these again with maybe the next Zoom session. So on behalf of the team from Meda Mawatha, I would like to thank you very much for your time on a Sunday, and thank you to the viewers as well who joined us, and Dr. Asri and Dr. Brian. So I wish you all a good rest of the weekend, and I think only little is remaining on your side, Dr. Ravi. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.